Pluto's presence in a house brings a kind of perpetual motion to the affairs of that house, a dying and rising, a destruction and regeneration. Pluto brings you deeper and deeper into the center of your power. If you ignore Pluto's challenges, your power weakens and life becomes painful. Pluto is considered a difficult planet in part because you only get the power you work for. That power comes directly from awareness of yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As with death, there is no negotiation. You either master Pluto, or Pluto finds a million ways to master you. Pluto brings the same maneuvers to everyone, colored by two things, sign and house. The sign shows the way Pluto behaves. The house shows the area of life in which Pluto has the most influence. Right now, we're focusing on each of Pluto's house placements, beginning with the first quadrant of the chart, houses 1, 2, and 3. We'll start with the first house and the ascendant. The first house and the ascendant represent the way we interface with the world. It's known as the persona. Sometimes it's a mask that covers over everything we're attempting to hide. This area of the chart is the lens through which all of life is seen. When Pluto is situated here, life tends to be a rough ride. It's experienced as grueling until a lot of awareness is cultivated. These natives come off as circumspect and enigmatic. Remember, the god Pluto's special weapon was a helmet of invisibility. So when the planet Pluto is here, we find a person who puts on that helmet and disappears. In other words, they don't give the full picture. Pluto in the first uses this as a defense, a way to keep other people off center and confused. They really don't care to be known by the masses. This is therefore a way for them to keep their privacy and their power, to stay as unread as possible. There's no law that says Pluto in the first owes anyone the whole picture. However, there is a cost to this kind of defense. Unapproachability is usually the result. A reputation for being somewhat cold or difficult might arise. And it's true, you never see a Pluto in the first who gives off a light, open, breezy tone. Depending upon the amount of awareness that's present, they might even do the opposite. They might give off an uncomfortable sense of darkness, a sense of having been traumatized. As this placement heals, their energy can become quite powerful because they begin exuding strength and mastery. There's a sharpness to the perception here. They see vulnerabilities in people and in the systems around them. You can compare this placement to a lion on the savannah that watches the herd of antelope, looking for the one with the weak ankle who will be easy to take down. Due to this innate skill, Pluto in the first can be manipulative. That means able to exploit weaknesses, able to take any opening to achieve their objective. Of course, manipulation isn't all bad. Some situations actually call for it. A therapist may manipulate a client to the edge of an insight, too. These natives can also be quite bold when it comes to dealing with subjects that are traditionally considered taboo. They'll look unflinchingly at darkness. If it's directed properly, this placement makes for a very good psychologist. Sometimes people don't need the most brilliant therapist or the one that's most technically sound. They sometimes need the one that's most comfortable with darkness. This is an excellent placement for shadow work. In your shadow is truth, and in truth, there's lots of power. In awareness, there's the potential for mastery. And when Pluto is in the first, and the person begins to cultivate power, they can act as a beacon and help other people who are in search for personal power. But Pluto in the first is very careful about who they help. They have to see a person who is committed, someone who was really going to help themselves. Otherwise, they don't want to waste their precious energy. This placement feels especially foolish when they help the wrong person, when they misread someone that badly. It's also important for them to be seen as a capable fighter that controls personal behavior. When Pluto is in the first, we're all but assured that there will be many, many episodes of dropping into the underworld. And life itself will mean changing through long-term difficult experiences. Somehow it always ends up being about survival, even though it wasn't supposed to go that way. These trials by fire are meant to end in a person who is very strong, in command, and in control. There's a constant remaking of the self, a retooling, a reinforcing, staying vibrant and alive, staying interested in life. This is the challenge. When Pluto here is on the right track, we find an unshakable sense of eroticism, a love of life, a sense of self that no one and nothing can disrupt. But when the consciousness is low, this can be a person who likes bullying and wants to be feared. They're openly exploitive, jealous, envious. The health of a Pluto rising can be found in how they feel about other people having power. If they're happy to see strength around them, things are going well. If they try to hobble the powerful, there's a problem. Another everyday expression of powerlessness with this placement is the haughty and prideful persona. Haughtiness and pridefulness are attempts to avoid ego deaths. They're defenses erected in a world where they think pain is everywhere. The Plutonic personality may also alienate others by radiating resentment. They may strictly control emotion and trust no one. If Pluto is very close to the ascendant line, This planet will profoundly color the way the native approaches life. When Pluto is conjunct the ascendant, the lifetime is one of becoming something new, regenerating what has been lost, and doing it with no end. One of my teachers used to say that having Pluto rising is like riding a conveyor belt into a meat grinder every day of your life. Every Pluto rising knows what that means. So, what about when Pluto is rising but located in the 12th rather than the 1st? Well, anything in the 12th house is naturally hidden. It's naturally unconscious, and it's something the native will sacrifice a lot for. Pluto in the 12th tends to hide their vulnerabilities, their suspicions, their self doubt, and their extremes. In a way, this placement softens Pluto. A 12th house Pluto rising will also put an internal and spiritual spin on their quest for power. The desire for outer power, worldly power, turns into the drive for inner power. And for that, they will sacrifice just about anything. With Pluto in the house of money, we usually find a strong drive to make money. Since Pluto is good at cultivating wealth as a form of power, and the second house is about our natural skills and talents, we'll find a native who is good at turning their talents into cold hard cash. Making money, or more specifically, being self sufficient, is directly linked to self esteem when Pluto is in the second house. This is one of those sentences where someone will say, financial solvency linked to self esteem? Of course. Doesn't everyone feel that way? But in fact, they really don't. Some people consider supporting themselves to be a hassle that gets in the way of what really makes them feel self possessed. And still others wouldn't mind if rent just appeared on their doorstep every first of the month. They don't need to work for it, it doesn't matter to them. But Pluto has an earthier expression in the second, and it's always thinking about power too. So there tends to be a direct line for these natives between standing alone economically and feeling personally strong. And because they have an organic way of looking at their skills and traits as something they can turn into money, these natives find jobs that are well suited to them, which makes longevity and success more likely. Pluto in the second is, over the long haul, a very beneficial placement. Or should I say, there's an enormous amount of potential. But as we know, sometimes Pluto has to be spiffed up a little bit for that potential to come through. At the bottom of every Plutonic experience in the second are two simple questions. What is my value? And what am I worth? The accumulation and management of resources plays an important role in answering these questions. Let's not forget, Pluto brings perpetual motion to this area of life. which really means that these natives must answer these two questions over and over again on an ever deeper level. Pluto is like an archaeological dig. You have to go down through the layers of sediment, brushing away the dirt, finding the fossils, putting together a clear story. Because with clarity comes choice, and with choice comes power. And getting down to the deepest level of personal power is always Pluto's wish. These natives also tend to find the greatest number of life's betrayals in the second house. In other words, the most painful lessons in power come through money. They lose and gain personal power through the management of money and possessions. As one of my clients said recently, money is a manifestation of who I am. It tells me where to go. Managing money is a way of managing my soul. And soul is not too strong of a word. Soul is the deepest part of a human being, and as such, it belongs to Pluto. I've been working with this particular client for years. So I know that through most of her life, her Pluto in the second was quite dysfunctional. It was also off limits to exploration. All she'd say was that she was awful with money. She had a strong drive to work and get a good salary, but she used money as a conveyance to give her power away. She did this in part by paying the rent for a handful of her relatives. She included funds for some of their other needs as well. Most of what she made went to this and to other things that really weren't her responsibility. She made the minimum payment on a house that was in her name, but lived in by somebody else. No matter how much she made, she never had anything. This is one of Pluto's designs to siphon power away from the self. She also had a great many complaints about how these relatives were ungrateful for all she was doing. She even had an idea in mind that because she was footing the bills, these relatives should have been getting ahead, maybe even investing, thinking of a secure future for themselves. Instead, the surplus she created for them went to their vacations and their addictions. When I inquired, I found out that she had never actually had a discussion with any of them as to what they would do with the surplus. Still, she considered that situation an ongoing betrayal. The number of complaints she had about this voluntary situation showed that Pluto was at the helm and a desire for power was involved. Since her relationships with these family members were troubled and she was getting so angry, it was likely that her motives were based in power rather than in care or compassion. Pluto isn't known for compassion. Its energy is serious and it can be turned on the self easily. Remember, a scorpion will, when trapped, when under stress, sting itself to death, which isn't easy with that exoskeleton on. This client seemed very committed to having no financial wealth despite how hard she worked. With every direct deposit, she hurt herself. It came in, it went out, it made her feel terrible, and yet she wouldn't stop doing it. This was an outdated defense system, which is what normally hides under Pluto's dysfunctions. She had learned in childhood that the only thing that mattered was giving to her parents. In other words, she was told in one way or another that her needs and her safety and security were not important, only theirs were. She stretched this idea out to cover additional family members. One of the reasons she gave was to have the upper hand. It put her in a superior position. Of course, the upper hand can be extremely expensive. A transit gave her an opportunity to transform her behavior, and she took it. Since we're talking about the planet of survival here, her pathway into a new life began with a brand new interest in preparing for the apocalypse. But soon, this initial entrance turned into just a desire to live minimally. Pluto, the planet of extremes, can flip everything over in one fell swoop. She cut off the money stream, began saving, began cooking from scratch, squeezing the most out of all her resources, not buying, thrift shopping, bartering, saving, and even developing friendships with like minded individuals from whom she could learn. Since the bottom dwelling planet is involved, she even developed a secret life that included forms of scavenging. Pluto becomes obsessive, so she committed completely. And the last time we spoke, she reported that her house was nearly paid off. The problem in her case never was making money. The problem was always giving it away rather than taking care of herself. Thanks to Pluto, and thanks to the fact that she grew tired of self deprecation, her financial life is now completely regenerated. There are other ways that Pluto can express itself in the second. The possessive urge can be very strong. So we may see the hoarding of possessions, piling items high all around them, like a kind of exoskeleton. A less common way is using poverty as a means of control. Pluto in the second may design financial failure so that they can say, I'm poor, I can't help, you can't get anything from me. With this placement, you might also find a high level of resentment. That tends to happen in Pluto's house. The natives might carry a lot of anger at the wealthy, or maybe they feel they're getting back at the system by being on the dole. Another example might be calling the shots in a relationship by holding the purse strings. All of these dysfunctional behaviors are actually an opportunity. They're a means by which the native is supposed to get his or her power back. Pluto's placement in the third house, the house of early childhood, represents conflict and power struggles in the family. In particular, these have to do with siblings. These natives tend to report a difficult sibling, at least one that took a lot of the family's energy, or perhaps who bullied them, or in whose shadow the native grew up. This can include a sibling with special needs who, through no fault of their own, received the attention that actually belonged to all of the children. Since we're talking about the third house, and this house casts a pretty wide social net, the troubles can involve all the people associated with the third. That means conflicts with uncles, aunts, cousins, or even the peer group in the neighborhood. How plutonic this gets does depend upon the cards the native was dealt. I've heard experiences such as being treated with general anger and roughness, all the way to the darkest hair raising stories. But one thread runs through all of it, and that is that these natives learn, for one reason or another, to hold their tongue. Maybe they were turned off by vicious arguments in the family and didn't want to get trapped in that web. Or maybe they were stung by what was said to them. And yet, instead of fighting back, they internalized the pain. Maybe they kept family secrets about abuse or criminality. Pluto in the house of speech and language comes away with a feeling that words are extremely powerful. Words can make or break you. Words have the ability to maim and destroy the mind and soul. This awareness makes Pluto in the third very careful about what they say. These natives are laconic. They hold their cards close to the chest. Their main way of gaining and holding power also has to do with words. It's natural for them to withhold information. They'll withhold it from a partner, withhold it from children, withhold information at work, withhold the truth. They withhold to create a power struggle. Early on, it's usually a matter of survival. Later, they find it gives them the upper hand. How conscious they are of this fact depends upon the person. Some know exactly what they're doing. Others are unconscious, and still others would sincerely deny that this is their main power trip. Holding back pertinent information is about denying others the full picture. It isn't very cooperative, and it causes other people to feel confused. When that happens, a power differential is inevitable. So, this propensity is something that every Pluto in the third ought to look at and explore in their own time. Only good can come out of greater awareness. Now, being careful about what you say isn't always a power trip. In certain environments, it's simply smart. Since this placement tends to be very deep and willing to go into taboo topics, it can be best for them to be mindful and to take a look at who's in the room before they start speaking. We're talking about the third house after all. This is the house of messaging, verbal and nonverbal. Pluto is in charge of the unknown and the unseen. Put these two facts together, and Pluto in the third suggests a person who would be good at picking up and perceiving subtle cues. An individual might be saying one thing, and yet their body language is saying something else. A third house Pluto hears the words, but also notices the blink rate rising, a blotch appearing, a lip curling, a gaze held way too long, a pregnant pause. This placement can have very high powered perceptions. So, interrogation is right up their alley. These natives are also given a task, and that task is to dig deep into their own language to gain personal insight. When Pluto is in the house of language, words become a gateway to the underworld, and words become a path for evolution. Further, since this is Gemini's house, there's usually a strong desire to collect information. Knowing a lot feels to this Pluto like a matter of life and death. And it's true that knowing more can actually improve your chances of survival. The more you know, the more options you have, and the more likely you are to make it through any situation. This segment of the wheel is dedicated to naming and categorizing the world, separating one thing from another to control the environment. When Pluto's here, there can be a tremendous need to name and order everything. The danger with Pluto is always a fall into obsession. There can be an obsession for learning and categorizing just as much as anything else. This placement can be a powerful and influential speaker as well. Pluto in house 3 is a good teller of tales about suspense and the darker aspects of life, such as crime and murder. Alfred Hitchcock was a perfect example of this placement. Born in 1899, his Pluto was in the third in the sign of Gemini. It gave him the ability to message to the world with a kind of fluency that had never been seen before. Suspenseful dialogue was his specialty. Tension was his genius. His ability to mesmerize and hypnotize may stand out for all time. His work embodied the constant change of Pluto and the eternal restlessness of Gemini. When you compare his first movie with his last, you see a universe of change. That had something to do with the physical changes in the media of film itself, but it also had to do with his edgy plutonic mixture of sex, death, and daring. When it comes to Pluto, stagnation is death, change is life. This is also true of the intellect when Pluto's in the first intellectual house of the wheel. Every Pluto in the third is tasked with replacing old, outmoded thinking patterns with new and modern ones. If these natives don't stay current, if they don't keep a fresh and modern mind, Pluto makes them pay a price, usually in the way of a painful life due to painful communication. The underbelly of this shadowy planet is obsession, paranoia, and the tendency to see the world as a bad, threatening place full of corruption and beyond repair. In order to fight that, this placement draws in life-changing experiences that cause transformations in their point of view. Throughout a lifetime, repeated lessons like these can lead to an enormous strength of mind. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk. Stay tuned for all the ways you can get in touch For a birth chart reading and full astrological services, I'm Joy. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Dona eis Domine